that's one of the other aspects of DeepSeek. It doesn't require the same sort of processing, and that I think has some people sort of scratching their heads as how could DeepSeek be so good? Does this make sense? Is it all true?
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and great to have Darcy Ungaro joining us again on the New Zealand Tech Podcast today. Darcy, how are you?
I'm very good, Paul. How are you?
Great. Look, an exciting one today. There's some pretty gnarly stories and topics to delve into. Massive news wiping $1 trillion or more off the US share market sort of values with DeepSeek's R1 on the artificial intelligence front and then range of other topics. But I'm also very keen to delve in with you as the investment man on what's happening in the world of cryptocurrencies. We've just had in last it was over the weekend actually. News broke around David Belland, the co-founder of Ledger, who make these cold storage wallets for crypto. There were 80 law enforcement officers on the case, and they were able to find him, and he has survived. A little bit worse for wear though. I believe he lost at least a finger in the mix. So and some other bits in there as well. Now, before we delve into that, I should say a big thank you to our show partners, of course, to 1NZ, 2 Degrees, Spark, HP, and Gorilla Technology for their fantastic support of the New Zealand Tech Podcast. But maybe we start on talking about the investment world and maybe just give listeners a bit of an overview of where you fit into the big wide world of tech and investment and so on.
Yeah, it seems like increasingly technology and wealth, or especially new wealth, there seems to be this convergence going on where if you understand some of the language, some of the trends, some of the things that are happening in the technology and in the finance space and where they converge, specifically cryptocurrency, but also investing in traditional companies that are utilizing AI and other forms of technology, you can kind of get in when things are kind of unknown and people are still wondering if it's legit or not. And so, how I sit is that maybe I'm gullible, maybe I'm open-minded, maybe I'm onto something, I don't know. But with crypto in particular, I've been talking to my clients as a financial advisor for probably over 7 years now, just over 7 years, around at least being open to allocating a little bit of their wealth into crypto. So I'm probably not alone these days, but for quite a while I was one of the weird ones that was actually for this sort of thing and feeling a lot more validated in this bull run, I'll tell you that much. But it does go in cycles, so I am dreading the day where the price of Bitcoin pulls back and the whole sector goes quiet for a few years, and then I look like a Muppet again. So but that's kind of my role. Is I talk to people, help them to develop strategies to get wealthy for the new world, and that means investing in managed funds, using investment properties, and then alternative investments like crypto and even precious metals.
Oh, it's good, I think, to really consider the role of these things, and of course, technology changes everything, and continues to do so. And I look back on varying scenarios where people have sort of suggested ways of investing or stocks and so on, and I've certainly had my own dabbles and experiences with how things can work depending on where you jump in on trends and so on. But I think the probably a key thing is that you take interest in securing your own future by getting involved in investment. It's sort of my take, even if it's just dabbling with kind of toy money and so on in very small amounts, and educating. And I think you're quite a strong proponent of that as well, right? Of getting your feet wet with these things and getting involved, even if you're not
into it yet.
Putting in any real levels of investment in.
It's education, right? And you mentioned, well, maybe it was before we hit record, I guess the benefits and the dangers of being your own bank. And I think with cryptocurrency. It's one of those asset classes, unlike the other investments in your portfolio, where you can take custody of it in a more direct fashion. And that's why I think that story with one of the Ledger co-founders is so intriguing, because Ledger is a cold wallet, which helps you to self-custody your own Bitcoin. And I guess if someone knows that you're into Bitcoin or other types of crypto that have, gone off lately, then I guess it does make you a bit of a target for bad actors. And I certainly don't want to get my fingers mutilated. So thankfully, though, I lost all my crypto in a boating accident just last summer, which is just amazing. So I don't have to worry about this.
Well, interesting that you mentioned that. I thought about this for a long time, and it's not like I had $1 million or anything sort of sitting in crypto, but I had a little bit of Bitcoin there. And when I saw that there were these crypto funds starting up that are actually really easy to get into through Sharesies and so on, I thought, well, a crypto fund isn't perfect because you're going to have some extra layers that you're paying to somebody else. So there's some level of downside to that. But I like that thought that it's not on me to be my own bank.
Yeah.
And so basically I cashed in my Bitcoin, or my fraction of a Bitcoin as it was in my case. And I'll see what happens as to whether it makes sense to put that into a fund. But the fact that you've got all these things you can get to through Sharesies and other mechanisms through the share market you can get involved and
that's what's going to be
gives you another option. And I guess this plays into probably what we've talked about before. As more time goes on, there's that potential ramp up where more people get involved in cryptocurrencies in varying ways as it becomes more mainstream. And for something like Bitcoin, where there's a fixed amount of the asset, unlike I guess most currencies, you do expect that to more than likely keep growing over time. Although it's pretty it can be pretty inconsistent and pretty volatile at times, right?
Like anything, right? It's always a rocky road before you get that takeoff. And I think if you're interested in getting good performance, like good returns with, relatively speaking, low risk, which might sound a little bit strange to people, but when you have a really, really tiny little bit of Bitcoin or type of crypto, then you have the opportunity of getting a really, really good return, but you're not sacrificing all of your wealth, right? So if you cashed in your Bitcoin and you're waiting for the price to correct, for example, and then you put it back into one of these funds, the benefit of using a fund like an exchange-traded fund is that you're not your own bank. You're not going to get your fingers mangled by some French assassins. You're going to get the benefit, though, of number go up. And I think when we're honest, a lot of people that are involved in Bitcoin are actually interested in the number going up, like the price appreciation, more so than the other utility, the other things that it can do for you. Like being your own bank is a really important thing for a lot of people, especially on the libertarian spectrum, independence from government and ability to actually custody your own wealth. I think that can only be done in a self-custodied Bitcoin wallet. However, we're starting to hear more developments where there can be exchanges, like in-kind exchanges. So if you were an investor in a Bitcoin exchange-traded fund, hopefully pretty soon, both ways maybe, I don't know, you can exchange it for real Bitcoin.
Right.
And I think that's what will make a big difference, because a lot of the concerns that people have with the gold ETF is a bit of an analogy, is that there's a lot of question marks around, does the gold actually exist? Because it's not allocated gold, right? And so with Bitcoin, is it just in one big pot and no one knows? Or is it at one specific address and you can actually withdraw your Bitcoin out? That makes a big difference. And so, but for I think 90% of people, an ETF, to give them the benefit of price appreciation is all that they will ever benefit from, all that they'll ever see the benefit from. But I think the more you get into it, the more you really appreciate these other qualities. That's what I've found anyway.
Yeah, it's an interesting aspect. And what are you seeing in terms of the trends for, I guess, securing your Bitcoin? We had the news earlier in the month around Cryptopia. Now, this as a cryptocurrency trading platform, but also people were leaving their crypto, currency sort of stored on the exchange. What we heard, liquidators have successfully returned something like 400 million, I think, in New Zealand dollars in terms of value of cryptocurrency back to original account holders. Now, they were hacked sort of 6 years ago, and obviously they were able to actually return a reasonable chunk, in part because the value of crypto has moved up over a period of sort of 5-6 years, right? So there's that aspect, but we've certainly seen the sort of the dark side of crypto. I saw a stat a while back, and you might know the number better than I do, but it was the percentage of, I think, Bitcoin that is considered lost.
Yeah.
And I think it was somewhere between 10 and 20%.
Yeah, I think it's like 4 to 5 mil is my recollection of that. But it's massive, right? So and this is people that didn't copy down their security passphrase. So when when you have your own digital wallet, I probably should back this up by just saying, hey, this is kind of why it's so important, right? If you have a wallet app installed on your phone, or you might use Ledger or a cold wallet that you unplug from your device, you should have your passphrases, which is a string of words, and that can back up your wallet if you lose the actual device that it's sitting on. And so a lot of this lost Bitcoin is probably because of that they maybe had a device stolen or lost or damaged, and then their passphrases weren't actually copied down, or they were copied down but they were discovered by somebody else, and it's not that hard to do, like my boating accident. But if you think about how to rebuild, like if you wanted to make sure that you're doing things the best way, the gold standard way, you'd actually use a multi-sig wallet, where your crypto wallet now is just one of a few keys. So you'd have 3 keys, and 2 of them have to sign each time you transact. So it's like having somebody else being forced to co-sign with you at the bank before you send any money. And that has a lot of benefits, because if somebody wants to abduct you and chop off your fingers, if you don't give them your passphrases or your crypto, you genuinely don't have it, because there would be safety measures so that the other person wouldn't sign on your behalf if you try to give them some money. So I think a lot of this stuff, though, people learn the hard way. I know I've learned the hard way. I've lost money on Celsius, which isn't exactly the same as Cryptopia was, but that settled last year as well. So, these things are quite tragic, and a lot of people have lost a lot of money. But the good news is that eventually, sometimes, the money comes back. And for a lot of people that have been in this space, the people that are worst with crypto are the ones that sell too soon. Sorry, Paul, that's you, isn't it? So I just insulted you on your own podcast. Sorry, but the people who you need to be fearful of is yourself, not other people. And I think the irony is with Cryptopia, with even Ross Ulbricht, who was recently freed from prison, he was forced to hang on to his Bitcoin during an entire cycle or more, right? And that can actually be the best thing for us, is to actually lose your wallet, but then discover it later on, and then the price is just add another couple of zeros behind it.
I sold mine once. It was actually at a reasonable price, but
good.
But comparatively speaking,
I'm just gonna make you regret it now. You're gonna go, buy some right after the show.
Yeah, if it would have doubled today, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, look, there's a lot more we can delve into on this, and maybe we'll look at some future episode and we can delve a bit more in. But I think it's good to tap into these topics. And then there's non-fungible tokens, NFTs, we've spoken about in the past. They've kind of largely kind of come off the boil, but who knows what the future could hold on some of these other things that use the blockchain. I'd like to jump into DeepSeek, because this is really sort of the big topic at the moment. Yeah. Hearing sort of left, right, and center from people that are very curious. DeepSeek, for those who haven't seen the coverage, I guess you call them a chat GPT competitor. Their AI toolset. It's been getting a lot of attention because it's open source. It seems to be better, on varying metrics than the other AI models that are out there. costs a fraction of the other models for them to train it. If you want to pay for certain aspects of it, it's a fraction of the price. So yeah, by opening up and making available a platform, and it's not as though what we had for AI the last couple of years hasn't been pretty cost effective and capable and so on, but there haven't been too many models that are open source that you can then take and do your own stuff with as well. But of course, there's a level of caution when it comes to these platforms. You've heard a bit about DeepSeek. What stands out for you? There's obviously the investment aspect where we've seen, was it over $1 trillion sort of wiped off the US stock exchange, which, for many, they won't feel too pleased about that one particularly. And I know we have listeners who invest in the likes of NVIDIA, who were I think hit the hardest, because that's one of the other aspects of DeepSeek. It doesn't require the same sort of processing and that I think has some people sort of scratching their heads as how could DeepSeek be so good? Does this make sense? Is it all true?
The one thing that really jumped out at me at the beginning, and I'm still scratching the surface, I downloaded the app this morning and I was starting to play around with it, and the voice just feels different. It feels like you are talking to somebody else. And if you've been using ChatGPT or Grok on X for a while, or Copilot, it has a certain, what it's going to answer back, and its biases. And so when I was using
when you're saying voice, you're not talking about speaking to it, using
just the tone.
Because I've used it, but I hadn't noticed a voice as such.
No, I have voices in my head, but this is something different, Paul. Those voices are still the same. But that's the first thing that jumped up at me was moat. And I think if you're investing in anything, you kind of want to consider what the moat is. Like if there's a castle and there's this body of water to stop the competitors from coming in and copying what you're doing. In technology, that must be so hard, because especially if there's any flavor of open source, because you can copy and paste and then just modify it. But when NVIDIA was and there's been other allegations of like round tripping and stuff like that NVIDIA has been engaging in. And I think that when you are looking to invest in anything, you do kind of want to think, what time frame will this company be popular for? Are we dealing with an Apple here, or are we dealing with something that is going to pop real quick? And a lot of people have been calling this a bubble for a very long time, I think all of last year, and just waiting for a pin to prick it. Is this the pin? I don't know, but it's interesting that they can do so much more with a fraction of the resource, bootstrapping it and using chips that are older than what they thought. Because it seems like the incumbent is really good at perfecting what they do already, and then the people that are on the outside breaking in are really good at kind of building it from the ground up, which means that if there's a blind spot or they're going down a wrong path, then that's a massive risk that you never really know until there is a competitor that kind of pops up. And so in that sense, I kind of like what's happening here, rather than wait for things to go on much longer and then a bigger bubble to prick, a bigger correction to occur. It's best that this happens right away so people can understand just how, I guess, fragile this growth really is, how easy it could change into becoming a ubiquitous sort of like commodity like the internet. AI could just be it's just an ingredient. You can't really control it or own it. It just is. And I think maybe that's where things go, and that's why ultimately it's a race to zero. I'm not suggesting that that's true, but there's a risk that that's where this goes, is that it just keeps on deflating and it decentralizes. There's just thousands of copycat versions of this now that it's so cheap to produce. But there's a whole bunch of other concerns, which you alluded to before we hit record, that I think are things that I never thought about. But
yeah, so when we look at feeding data into any sort of AI system, it's really really important to think about, well, who are you giving this data to? How's it going to be stored? Is it secure? If you're sending it to the company directly, and of course we know that there are some legal implications for data going to Chinese companies from, a government sort of legislative perspective, and data might be accessed by government and you would probably never know. Now, that's not just exclusive to China, but I think there are some differences with the regime in China compared to democratic countries, but these are still things that we need to consider regardless. But I think even more so when you've got more of an authoritarian regime and you've got particular legislation that is public. And of course, we've seen these varying pushbacks against the likes of TikTok. We've got Temu out there, where I've been reasonably critical of in the media in the past. Their prior app to Temu from their parent company, they had that app banned from the Google Play Store at least, and then they reshaped it and they had another go and it got through, and now that's become a really big place for commerce. And so there are considerable challenges there. And if we look at, say, the open source code, and I think people will argue, well, it's open source, we can see what's in there, it's all good. But of course, most of us don't have the time or even the expertise to look at open source code and work out whether it's safe.
Just put it into DeepSeek and just say, hey, is there anything wrong with this open source code that I need to worry about?
Well,
you think it would be that honest?
There are platforms that will help you with that, but of course you're talking about a reasonably large code base. So I'm sure there will be people that will look at the open source code and do their own sort of evaluations. But we have seen issues in the past, and sometimes that is from entities and organizations that we would trust to do good things, but there have been back doors put into well-known platforms and duped people. So we have to be aware of that.
Is that though? Are we at risk of, I guess, because there's this thought that there's good governments and bad governments, right? And China bad, watch out for everything they put out there because they're going to steal stuff from you and all that sort of stuff. And meanwhile, we believe blindingly, we just trust our own governments and assume that they would never do anything like that. But do you think that there's a little bit of that going on where probably no government is squeaky clean here? Are we too concerned about the Chinese? I'm playing devil's advocate, by the way.
Yeah, no.
But are we too concerned with the Chinese thing?
Look, it's important to actually step back and to look at the bigger picture. I think you do have to recognize that governments are made up of people. People do some dumb things, and there's also a broad mix of ideologies and approaches that differing governments will take. And at any one time, when you look at a government that's in power, usually they've managed to get, or combined with in New Zealand with our system, the total government. When they got into power, they a little bit over 50% that thought, hey, they're going to do the best job, and a fraction under 50% that thought, no, they're not, right? And then that changes under them once a government's in place. And I think the latest I heard around our current government is, if there was polling, or if we had to vote today, we might well have a very different government, right? So there's a lot of aspects that come into play there. And if you look back on sort of the stuff that Edward Snowden leaked, and in fact, it's been suggested that he should be pardoned along with this other chap who's recently sort of been pardoned as well. So, Edward Snowden was able to reveal a lot of information that came through. He's now, Russia-based. But if we look at some of those things he leaked, one of them was that the United States, NSA, National Security Agency, they were behind some pretty bad things. And one thing that they got involved in was a backdoor in the RSA encryption, which was an important mechanism and a trusted mechanism for data encryption, communications, and so on. So look, these things will happen, and I think you wouldn't find a government in the world that you could say is squeaky clean. Everything that they've done is all perfect and above board, and usually these things will come out over time, often sort of years and years later. You don't necessarily sort of see it at the time. So there's some wisdom to how we approach these things. And you do have to keep them in balance. And I think, every individual, every organization has to make their own calls. For me, I'm pretty cautious about, say, TikTok and Temu, and I think we've got them both blocked on our home network. But there are ways around it. And look, I've certainly been having a play with DeepSeek. So, I've got the app on a device. I've created a login and have done some experimentation, and it looks pretty capable.
What do you find that it can do that's better than, say, ChatGPT?
I probably haven't done enough there where I've done a direct comparison to be able to say, hey, this is a lot better. But it does seem to return, when you put a prompt in and use it, it seems to be pretty snappy. The results seem to be pretty good. Sure, don't go and ask it around, Tiananmen Square massacre.
I saw that,
and so on. Of course, naturally, I was going to try these things out as one of the first things I did, and you get back an appropriate sort of can't help you with that sort of thing, and its version of a response. So that in itself, is somewhat understandable because of where it comes from. What is probably hard to know is, could there be more sort of subtle underlying elements where you ask for information and it is somewhat impacted by the different ideologies between, say, what is acceptable to the Chinese Communist Party and what might be accepted in more democratic countries. And so you could find things subtly there over time that you don't necessarily realize, but that your content actually is a little bit tweaked in a direction or another. So there are those sort of aspects, but again, every platform will have its elements of those things based on, even if they've had this is it Correct the Internet campaign where there have been complaints around, you ask an AI or you ask Google for sort of certain information, who's the best footballer in the world or this or that, and it veers towards the male sports person, because that's largely what would be found on the internet. And so we've got to realize that AI platforms are drawing from the bulk of the information on the internet, and then you may be dealing with particular things that they've built in. And that was, of course, an area where Google came a bit unstuck when they initially launched some things there, and they tried to kind of tweak things in a direction without really considering how that might actually mess up some of the results. So really hard to get this stuff right, and just I think it's important to be informed. It's also important to experiment and to get a feel for some of these technologies and to make your own judgment calls. But I think a lot of the commentary at the moment is, hey, you be very careful what sort of data you put into this new platform. And I certainly don't know too much around the individuals involved in DeepSeek, but we've certainly got some considerations there because of the jurisdiction under.
And that'll play out
which
over
they
time,
operate,
right? Like over time, that'll either be apparent or not that there were some bad actors and information was being siphoned off. But that could take a while, and the damage could actually be quite significant. So TikTok, Temu, DeepSeek, but this seems to be what's happening at the moment, where the West is just being served up more and more humble pie by the East in terms of, hey, anything you can do, we can do better. Even just driving in today, looking at all these SUVs and cars that I've never seen before, increasingly, these are Chinese copies of really popular cars in every class there is. They've been studying and they've just been doing the work to figure out how can we rebuild it better. And you're just seeing it everywhere. And so a lot of American exceptionalism, I guess you'd call it, or just the sense that their pride that they produce excellent results all the time, that must be really hard seeing their enemy, right? And you know, it's silly, but a lot of this is political. It's nation state. There's a lot of information war going on, and it's hard to know when you're just a pleb trying to make good decisions about security and investing and keeping our kids safe. It's really hard to filter through sometimes what feels like propaganda and what's genuinely innocent, good fun. Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's incredibly difficult, and I think, you know, unless you have, and there are some significant downsides to when, you know, a country tells you who you can and can't kind of deal with, buy products from, use their services, and so on. But actually, it can be really challenging to work out what are the appropriate calls. And look, I'm sure we will see New Zealand businesses that are leaning in on this technology in the same way we've seen people build an income stream off TikTok, right? There are definite, you know, pluses, especially when a technology comes through, you know, that is so disruptive because of its price point and its capabilities and so on compared to whatever else is out there. But possibly there'll be some pain as a flip side to that. There are a couple of other things just to touch on. Oracle and Microsoft in the news is potentially in talks to take over TikTok. We will see how that actually plays out, but certainly suggestions there that Oracle has outbid Microsoft to acquire things. But there's a bunch of unknowns there in terms of the information that's been shared to date. And so these things obviously have some investment sort of implications as well. You know, is it Oracle? Is it with Larry Ellison? And actually it's not Oracle. You know, who's actually going to have that ownership? What does the picture look like if that does go ahead? And there's a few different ways that could play out. And then OpenAI, they've made their announcement of their Stargate project with Trump. So, you know, that was kind of a big announcement there from Sam Altman, CEO at OpenAI, and others that were there, and talking about $500 billion US to build out this new artificial intelligence infrastructure, which is just, you know, mind-blowing numbers, you know, in order to give capabilities to OpenAI. There's a whole bunch of unknowns there. I see, you know, Musk sort of throwing stones at in terms of how much money they actually have at this point. Microsoft is sort of saying, well, we've got $80 billion to put in, but that's into our own infrastructure, and which of course is what OpenAI have used in the past is Azure for these things. But you've got you know, SoftBank in the mix there, Oracle and NVIDIA. So, you know, but between them, there's a fair bit of you know, money that can be thrown around. And then the last piece of the puzzle, I'm sort of curious around your thoughts, is Trump pardoning the Silk Road founder Ross Ulbricht. Now, this was, I guess many referred to it as a drug marketplace because it was an online marketplace on the dark web. So, you know, there's not too much on the dark web that's you know, in terms of things being sold that you would consider to be normal and legitimate, right? This is going to, yeah, the
I don't have a banner ad on there, and neither does your business. So,
yeah. So, like, have you considered what does this mean, and why might Trump be, you know, helping this I guess illicit tech founder, because you know he is a tech founder. It was just that his startup was not one that was a place for legal and legitimate things to take place.
Yeah. And it's hard to know whether or not his ideology happened before his business plan did, but and I'm referring to his libertarian bent, and he has quite a strong one. And I also do for full disclosure. And so I can kind of understand the excitement within the, say, libertarian or even the Bitcoin community, because there's a big overlap there, being really excited that he was freed, because it kind of feels like it's a battle won against the state's influence telling us what we should and shouldn't put into our bodies, right? So that was like the underlying mission, I guess, is that, hey, or his philosophy is that the government shouldn't, if people want to inject with themselves with all sorts of illicit drugs, so be it. There's going to be harm to that, and I personally don't condone that, but of course that's their right. Meanwhile, if you're going to make people put other types of medicine in their bodies, then that's also wrong. And so I think when Trump got voted in, there were certain elements in society that cheered, even if they hated him as a person, they still cheered, because it felt like there was a victory against the state that was encroaching. And so this is cool because he followed through on a promise that he made before. Now, obviously, he was trying to pander towards a group of people to get their vote. It worked, but he followed through. And if he follows through on this, then he might follow through on other things, like the strategic Bitcoin reserve, hopefully. He might follow through on, like, actually doing some pretty significant things. And so, like, I'm kind of torn because I know that, you should follow the law, but in this instance, maybe the law was defunct. The war on drugs since Nixon, really, the war on drugs has been a failure by all accounts, really expensive, and a lot of people have lost years in prison for no real benefit, just retribution. And so seeing that makes one think maybe there's going to be a new approach to this sort of thing, and maybe the actual cost on society will be reduced because of the incarceration cost. Yes, there's harm on society because of drug use. If you're going to see freedom money reign, there has to be a free marketplace. And that's what Silk Road was. It wasn't selling the right things for sure, but it was a free marketplace. The free market reigned, and the free market is very efficient. It's the best that we have. And so, free market money belongs in the free market. And I think if he gets out and he starts, I guess, going on podcast tours, which he probably will, he'll write books, he'll be a bigger voice now, which will add more momentum behind all of the philosophical drivers behind Bitcoin, which I'm quite fascinated by.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a few thoughts on that, but it's still early days.
Yeah, that sounds like quite a deep rabbit hole to go down. So we will save that up for the future. Anything else that you want to sort of share before we sort of wrap up the episode?
That's a dangerous question to ask me, Paul. No, I think touched on some pretty cool things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's leave it at that today. So thanks, everybody, for listening in. And, of course, a big thank you to our show partners, Gorilla Technology, 1NZ, HP, Spark, and 2 Degrees. Really, really appreciate their support for keeping us going over the years, and their support here in 2025. So that's fantastic. And look, I'm curious if you've got thoughts on some of these topics we've delved into. You may well not agree with some of our thoughts. That's not uncommon. So do feel free to get in touch. And you'll find myself and NZ Tech Podcast across the varying social media and streaming platforms. So do feel free to get in touch. If you've been listening to the audio, of course, make sure you follow us on video platforms such as YouTube. We stream from my profile, Paul Spain, on LinkedIn. So if LinkedIn's your thing, then follow me there. All right, well, that's us for this week. We'll catch you again on the next episode next week. And thank you again, Darcy. Where do people track you down online if they're looking for some help on the investment front and from a bit more of a techie perspective?
So at Ungaro Darcy on X, and LinkedIn, that's probably the only place that I kind of contribute most regularly. Best place to connect with me is on LinkedIn, actually.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you, Darcy, and thanks everyone for listening in. We'll catch you again next week. All right, see ya.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.